Focaccia is an Italian flatbread made with flour, water, extra virgin olive oil, yeast, salt, and sugar. It's very easy and quick to make. The name derives from Roman times, meaning hearth bread. To make focaccia, or Italian flatbread, you'll need 2½ cups of flour, 1 teaspoon of salt, 1 teaspoon of sugar, 1 teaspoon of dried yeast, 1 cup of warm water, 1 tablespoon of olive oil. You'll be adding a drizzle to your bread before you bake it, and for the drizzle you will need 1 tablespoon of olive oil, 1 tablespoon of hot water, and 1/4 teaspoon of salt. As always, when working with yeast, you need to bloom your yeast, starting with 1 teaspoon of sugar, into which I'm pouring about 1/3 cup of hot water and sprinkling my teaspoon of yeast over the top, and I'll walk away from this for about 5 to 10 minutes while it blooms. While we're waiting for the yeast to bloom, I'm adding my salt to my flour and using a spatula, just mixing the salt in with the flour. Now I'm going to add, just eyeballing this, 1 tablespoon of olive oil to my yeast mixture. That's about right. Our yeast has bloomed nicely, so it's time to add the yeast, oil, and sugar mixture to my flour and start making additions of hot water to form a nice soft dough, just as you would with any other yeast bread. At this point, this is nothing more than just a plain old traditional classic pizza dough. There's basically sugar, salt, olive oil, flour, and yeast in small quantities. Keep kneading your dough until it forms a smooth ball, and then place it in a bowl and rest it for 20 minutes. Our dough has rested for 20 minutes, and now it's time to spread it in the baking pan. So with some olive oil, just using your fingertips, spread the oil around the pan and up onto the sides, and just pick up your dough, put it in the middle of the pan, and using your fingers, you just want to stretch it around to cover the whole pan. Now I can tell that this dough does not want to stretch, so I'm going to let it sit for 2 minutes and then I'll continue spreading it. I had to let this dough rest a few extra minutes. It really wanted to resist me, but once I floured my fingers lightly and gave it its proper rest time, you can see it filled out the pan nicely. So the next step in this process is to cover it, and it needs to rest again for 30 minutes. Our bread has been resting for 30 minutes, and it's getting nice and light, and it's rising a little bit. There's not very much yeast in this recipe, so you don't expect a big rise. Time to take your drizzle, which you've made, olive oil, hot water, and your 1/4 teaspoon of salt. Pour it over. And using a brush, just spread it evenly over the top of the bread. And our bread will rest again for another 45 minutes to an hour. Our bread has been resting for an hour, and it's now time to go into our preheated 425-degree oven. This is the time you can experiment with toppings such as onions, olive, sun-dried tomatoes, herbs like rosemary or oregano, or cheeses, or anything that you want. But I'm choosing to make this just a plain focaccia bread. Into our oven for 15 minutes until it's golden brown. Focaccia can be cut in a variety of shapes, from squares to triangles, long skinny breadsticks. It can be sliced in half for sandwiches, and is always a tasty addition to a bread basket. Or it can even be used as a flatbread pizza. Focaccia never gets wasted in an Italian kitchen. The excess can go into soups, stuffings, and other dishes, and it's sure to become a kitchen favorite.